Hi there, this is Joe Meadows and welcome to Safety Leaders Now, the show where we cut through the noise and identify the strategies and tactics that today's top safety leaders use to keep their teams safe. On this episode, we've got Steve Hall. I really enjoyed talking to Steve. I feel like he has a really thoughtful and creative approach to safety leadership and maybe leadership more generally. You look at Steve's profile, you can see he's a lifelong learner, clearly constantly trying to drive improvement and do things in a creative way and ultimately deliver excellent results, within the constraints of the business he's operating within, which everybody's trying to do. So anyway, I really enjoyed this conversation with Steve. It was fun to get to know him. This was our first conversation, so I was glad that we were able to get so much out of it. So with that, without further ado, let's dive into this episode with Steve Hall. Okay, Steve, so can you explain to us a little bit about what your role is?
I'm currently the Director of Health and Safety for Canada for a company called AFL, which is a global telecommunications provider. We're head office in South Carolina, Duncan, South Carolina. We're in most countries. We're all over the globe, and I'm responsible for Canada. We have operations from Victoria all the way to northern Quebec, several hundred workers in Canada, another several hundred contractors. We do everything from design, engineer, build, and maintain the fiber optic network for all the big telcos in Canada.
Okay, gotcha. So you're looking at a few hundred employees, 100 contractors. How big is AFL globally?
Oh, AFL globally is probably thousands of employees. We have several manufacturing plants alone down in South Carolina, manufacturing as well in Mexico, as well as the UK. So yeah, AFL is a very big company. We are owned by our parent company, Fujikura, which is even bigger. They're a big conglomerate out of Japan that owns a lot of different companies.
Okay, and is the whole AFL group, that's all fiber optic kind of installation maintenance?
Yeah, installation, maintenance, manufacturing, everything related to telecom.
Okay, awesome. All right, so a little bit of background there. We know what the company does. Can you articulate a little bit about, so you're leading health and safety for Canada, telco, sounds like kind of across the board, manufacturing through installation and maintenance. Can you articulate a little bit about what is the health and safety strategy in that environment for you? How would you kind of sum it up?
Yeah, the health and safety strategy, telecommunications is a very fast industry, and it's federally regulated, so it has some challenges. A lot of legislation is not set up for telecommunications work. And you find that out very quickly, that there's so many different scenarios that you cannot possibly cover every scenario with safe job procedures and what have you. So you really have to focus on the culture and train people to do the right thing and think about what they're doing and not just be robotic. Some industries you can train a worker. They don't even know why they're wearing eye protection. They just know when they do this job, they're wearing eye protection. But we have to take it a step further, and we want them as a true professional to know why they're wearing that eye protection, because there'll be times when there'll be out of the box situations, and we need them to be able to think and understand what hazards and controls actually are.
Okay, so it's more about empowering those folks in the field to just be better assessors of risk and empowering them to manage that effectively.
Yeah, exactly.
Gotcha. And so can you just give me an example of what is one of those scenarios where it's maybe tricky to proceduralize things? Can you just help me understand sort of an example of something that might fall outside those boundaries?
Years ago, we dealt with a situation regarding residential roofs. So in the telecom industry for the last 50 or so years, the telecom was brought into your house through the electrical mass on your roof. And if you notice, everyone's different, but most of them are inset on your roof several feet. And sometimes from a ladder, you could just barely touch them, and sometimes they're just a foot out of your reach. So those are situations where employees know they're not allowed to be doing something on a roof without fall protection, but when it's just a foot outside of your reach, we need them to stop and think and say, okay, I can't do it safely, so I need to think of another way. So how we addressed the roof issue mainly is we had a working committee, and we really brought subject matter experts from the field, personnel that have been doing this for 30 plus years, and said, here's the problem, we need solutions. And we found that just because it's been done that way for the last 30, 40, 50 years, that it didn't need to be. You could actually enter your fiber optic cable into any point in your house. It was just, that's the way it was always done, and that's the way it continued. So by employees bringing us those challenges and saying, hey, this is what I've come up with, and I don't know how to overcome it, but I know I can't go on this roof because it's just a foot outside my reach, so I need some help. As opposed to that employee that says, you know, it's a foot outside, I can just quickly step on the roof and nobody would even know. And then it would have been like that for the next 50 years.
So just a safety by design thing. Let's just change the scope of the work itself, and all of a sudden not required.
Exactly.
Gotcha. Okay, awesome. That's a great example. Okay, so I'm gonna kind of diverge a little bit from my set path here. So you mentioned that, you know, you're leading health and safety for Canada. You have this big sort of multinational conglomerate, all kind of doing the same thing. Can you help me understand, how do you fit within the sort of safety structure of AFL on a global level? So are you reporting to your local leader in Canada? Are you reporting to safety globally, both? How does that work? And like, how is your progress measured if you're running this national group?
Yeah, so I report directly into the Global Health and Safety Director, and he sits in Duncan, South Carolina, and he has responsibility for the entire AFL footprint, which is globally. And then I also have a indirect or dotted line to our Canadian president. And I'm measured basically from our statistics, and then I create a safety plan, or basically my 2022 safety plan. I get measured off the goals and how I've attained those goals.
And is that those goals are set by global? Like it's that you're getting those targets there, or you're setting your own targets?
So injury statistics are set globally. The Canadian group definitely has input, and of course the Canadian president would have the most input. However, our day-to-day or our yearly goals are pretty much down granular to the business unit. So if one business unit has a high number of incidents involving ergonomics, then they may set a target specifically for that business unit. And then it just all flows up into my entire EHS plan for the year, where I'll set a bit broader goals at a higher level. And I've really worked on, when I look at the strategy, because I don't have a 50 people or 50 person team with health and safety. So I really had to look at people's job descriptions and align it appropriately, and really focus on separating the operational aspect out of safety and the strategic element. Or else you spend all day spinning your wheels, and you have your whole team going in different directions. And that's what I found when I came into this job. We had essentially managers making director decisions, directors making safety advisor decisions, safety advisors making manager decisions. So that was my first order of business, is let's review everybody's roles and responsibility and really separate that out and make it very clear of what your role and what your level of responsibility is. And it's worked out fabulous, because we have senior managers and managers that have a tremendous amount of experience, and they're making the decisions they should be. And then safety advisors are learning from that and being mentored the way up, but they're not making decisions that are way above their pay grade, and which would cause us any problems. And that gives me time to just forget about the operational aspect and just more focus on the higher level strategic, the business planning side of it, and not have to worry about the actual day-to-day operation of the business.
So can you, that makes a lot of sense. Obviously, clarifying, giving people role clarity, making sure they're resourced correctly to do what it is you're asking them to do. And you can be more clear on what resources you need to provide when we're all having a transparent conversation about where expectations lie. Can you help me now? So after going through that exercise, you've clarified all this, it's all working. Can you give me some examples of, what does that look like in practice? So who are your direct reports, and why did you choose to structure their responsibilities in the way that you did?
So we have a very lean team. Like I have one safety advisor per province, and for in BC, we could, depending on the time of the year or how busy we are, we could have a few hundred people in that province. Where in my old background with construction, we could have had 30 safety advisors with that many people. So we really had to utilize the management team, the operations management, and be able to support them remotely. So the way I structured it, I brought in some EHS managers that were definitely CRSP qualified, had tons of experience, and I segregated the business units. So I said, these are your going back a step. So segregated the business units and said, these are your business units and these are your advisors. We do need to look at the whole system holistically, but you're going to have responsibility for this business units. And then the advisors, once we clearly define their roles and responsibility, they became 100% more efficient because they weren't spending their time attending meetings that they didn't need to be. That was the manager's role. They were able to go into the field and create that data.
And just to expand a little bit, what are those business units? Is that like your manufacturing, installation?
Yeah, so we have no manufacturing in Canada. So in Canada, our main three business units are the guys that build the network, or guys and girls that build the network. Then we have a business unit that installs it and maintains it. And then we have a business unit that does like low-rise apartment buildings, multiple dwelling units. Those are essentially our core three operational units.
So you've got a manager for building the network, installation manager, and then you're like installing wires within a mid-level building guy.
Yeah, so I actually have two managers. I have one that oversees the construction aspect, and then the other oversees the installation and then the multiple dwelling unit businesses. And she actually is my go-to number two, I would say.
Yeah.
And she does have some national level responsibility. And with running a team this lean, I had to look at my two managers and say, okay, what are their strengths and weaknesses and how can I leverage this? So I have one that, like myself, has an MBA. So I was able to leverage him with business plans because that's his strong point. And it's not fair to ask my other manager to spend 20 hours on a business case when he could do it in 2 hours. But her strong point is technical knowledge. So I use that to the best of my ability, and writing. She's a phenomenal writer. She writes procedures in minutes. She's great with the business. So I have to utilize people for their strengths and weaknesses. And that goes all the way down to the EHS advisors. Because we're so lean, there's a lot of secondary tasks in corporate health and safety. There's a lot of projects, some we initiate, some that are coming from our head office in South Carolina, and we can't do everything. So there's times I have to find out, okay, which safety advisor has X skill? Maybe it's one's super good at making presentations. Well, that's what I need you to do then. I'm going to leverage that skill, and maybe somebody has identified that they want to improve on a skill. And then we assign them work to help them improve on that skill and give them that opportunity. We don't throw them into a lion's den with their executive team and say, okay, now present. You said you wanted to present, now present. No, but we will have them attend various meetings and give them recognition and credit for what they've done and help bring them up. But we're such a lean team. We really have to rely on people's strengths and weaknesses and their passion.
So can you maybe you just touched on a few points or a few times there, and I want to maybe peel the onion a little bit here, if it's not too much of a faux pas. But why is it that you feel your team is so lean? Is that a business constraint, or is that simply because due to the nature of the operation, it doesn't make sense to have a larger safety team?
It's definitely a constraint of the business, but it's also myself. A lot of safety people will come in and say, okay, I need 10 people because that's easy. It's a lot easier the more people you have, of course. And one thing, when I started moving up in the safety world, I said to myself, I don't want to be that typical safety person that is a hindrance to the business. I'm just somebody that's out there spending their money. If I can't stand in front of the president with my hand on a Bible and say, I absolutely need this person, then I won't. So we need to be as efficient as possible. And our team was extremely overworked because we also take care of a lot of the training. Like all my safety advisors are certified fall protection trainers. We do driving program training. yeah, so we have a heavy involvement in the training aspect. So if we're going through a heavy training cycle, we could be tied up for months on end. So we had to look at ways to gain efficiency, and we have workers working anywhere, like sometimes up in Tofino. We could have 2 workers up there for a week. So my safety advisor in BC doesn't have time to drive to Tofino to oversee 2 inspectors. So I thought, okay, how do we drive efficiency? Well, every one of us has an iPhone or a cell phone, so let's do some virtual inspections and see how that goes. And at first, people said, "Oh, this is silly," and then once that change management aspect was over, people said, "Wow, this is great." I asked them to see his hazard assessment. They showed me X, X, and X, everything I asked for, and we were on the call for less than 3 minutes. And I'm happy. I'm confident that they're doing what they need to do, and I don't have to drive 6 hours up to Tofino.
So you're just are we, when you say virtual assessment, that's a FaceTime call?
Essentially a FaceTime call. Yeah. Show me your hazard assessment. Show me your work boots. Show me this. Show me whatever you want to see. Have that discussion and do it over FaceTime. And it's the same we've looked at with COVID. We looked at our training model and we pivoted our entire business within 24 hours to go to 100% virtual. Of course, we do have a technical aspect where you have to be in the classroom. You have to be shown and display that skill, but that's more for the technical training. But if there was something we could do online, we were doing it. And our whole business, we pivoted in 24 hours. And that was a big lift. Now, I did my MBA virtually. And at the time, and that was years ago, and people said, "Oh, virtual is not the same online. It's not even close to being in classroom." And I said, I beg to differ, because it was actually a lot harder because you don't have that FaceTime with professors that you do in a brick and mortar type. And now, due to COVID, the rest of the world saying, why do I need to be in a classroom with 400 other students when I could be at home? And they only present the PowerPoint anyway.
Yeah.
So why do I need to be there? So when we pivoted to a virtual style training, a lot of people said, "Oh, it's not the same. I like to see people." And I said, no, there isn't a problem with the deliverance and the program. It's a problem with yourself. You need to think about how your own process, and it's just new to you and you've never done it, and you've done it your way for 30 years. Maybe you've done training face to face. It's because you aren't comfortable with it yet. So please just indulge me and give me time. Well, how are we going to address if people are paying attention? Okay, let's talk about some of the challenges. Cameras all have to be on. I said, what? They're like, okay, that's a good idea. I said, well, what about, how do you know if they're engaged? Well, how do you know if they're in a classroom? Well, I asked them questions. Okay, there we go. Why can't you do that virtually? So it was all about efficiency. And I think COVID's really brought organizations to realize a lot of those efficiencies and change their whole model.
Yeah, I love that. I think that, using that or viewing COVID as an opportunity to say, hey, we need to rebuild everything anyway. Can we do it in a way that's going to allow us to be more efficient and more effective? Makes a ton of sense. And I think, what was that something that you were able to implement without a ton of pushback in the organization? I mean, other than what you discussed, was that it? You basically were able to articulate, these are your concerns, this is how we're going to solve them, and it was smooth sailing from there, or was there any other challenges you had to work through to get that change in
Yeah,
place?
so I'm fortunate. Our business unit team, our business unit directors and VPs that I work with are outstanding. They saw the challenge. They want their business to be operating, and we were all on the same page that we need to figure out how we can train people and get them into the workload to meet our client demands. So they obviously probably had the same thing going on in their minds, going, how are we going to pull this off? But no, there wasn't a lot. There was relatively zero pushback. It was, how are we going to achieve this, and what do you think is going to happen, and how do we address this? And okay, let's do it.
Do you think it would work as well if you're using? Do you think that live element is important? Could you use CBT in the same way that things are pre-recorded, or do you think it's important to at least be able to ask those questions virtually?
I think for training, it's nice to at least see your face and have that question period. Online type of training is great for professionals, like maybe a lawyer doing an upgrading course where he just watches or a current case summary, or maybe a safety professional listening to somebody talk about a safety management system or something. That's great to listen to. but for training, I think it's good to face to face. But in saying that, one of the efficiencies we're looking at right now is developing orientation that's online. We spend a lot of money doing face-to-face orientations in our organization, and with some of our business units, and that's simply not needed. You hire professionals, they can watch a 20-minute video and pretty much be good to go, because they're just trying to get familiar with their company. So you don't need that face-to-face time as much as you do for training.
Yeah, and do you think people need to invest a ton of money in producing those resources as far as digital, having a 20-minute orientation?
No, we actually started with COVID, with our return to office. When we shut down our offices, we had the ability for people that absolutely had to come back to our office to be there. So in one office, we had approximately 20,000 square feet, and we had like 4 people there. So more than enough space. But I didn't have time to do the orientation with those people, each person, of course. And that number could change almost on a weekly basis. Maybe one of the business unit VPs could say, okay, I need this person to come back just Monday and Tuesday next week. So I didn't have time. At first, we started where I would actually physically orientate them and say, these are our COVID protocols. These are our expectations. Do you understand? Because of the seriousness of COVID when it first happened. And very quickly, I said, okay, this is not sustainable. I do not have time to give this orientation. So I simply recorded myself presenting it on Teams. Very elementary. It was the first time I ever did it. So I think the first time I had 19 or 20 takes, but it wasn't super high tech by any means. I do appreciate going through that experience myself when I see a well-produced video or a training video, because I know how much work it is just to do just that recording yourself. So I do value some well-produced videos for sure.
Just on a tactical level, if anybody's ever, I'm obviously, I love shiny new things, and there's an app called, it's literally called like, and it's a great tool for things like that. If you're ever curious, you can record presentations, and it actually records each slide as a take. And so you can record new takes of like slide 15 without re-recording the whole presentation, which is a game changer.
Wow. Where was that 2 years ago? I never heard of that. So that's great.
Yeah, it's a pretty slick one. I think it's a big play to get acquired by Zoom, in my opinion, but that's a whole different conversation.
Yeah, I would get through. I'd be on slide 6 or slide 7, and then all of a sudden a dog would start barking in the background, or somebody would knock at my door, and it would just be, okay, let's redo this again.
Yeah, in our software business, I do the same thing, and I'm always, again, recording Zoom calls or doing things like that to get people training resources. And then I found this tool, and I use it all the time now because it's such a, there's a level of polish that you don't get otherwise, and it makes it 10 times easier. So if anybody listening, or if it wants to, give me a free subscription, that would be great. So you're talking, I love this kind of theme here of you saying, hey, I love the courage, frankly, of saying, hey, safety kind of defaults in it's a cautious industry, I think, by its very nature. And so people, I absolutely understand that so many people will say, well, let's just throw people at the problem. It's a great way to show that you're doing something. It's very defensible. And I think it's a lot harder to take the path that you've taken of saying, hey, if we look at the objectives that we're actually trying to achieve, throwing people at this isn't necessarily going to be the way we need to do this. And fundamentally, we are a business, we're trying to do this. Safety is a good investment, but only if what we're investing in is making a difference. So let's be as efficient as possible here. That's, I feel like, a huge part of what this show is about. That being said, I think because we operate in businesses, I think one of the things that's hard for people to make moves like that is how do we, or is the structure within which we report. So can you just help me understand, and you might have just been lucky in this case, but can you help me understand what are the things that you report up and out for your team? And then let's maybe just start there. And when you went in this efficiency direction, did the metrics that you report on support you in making that change, or were they a hindrance? If that makes sense. So if training hours was a metric you report on, and all of a sudden your training hours fall, but you're still getting other training done, you'd probably have a problem. So is that something you kind of understand the question?
Yeah. So our metrics aren't really a hindrance. Our metrics are very statistical driven. My internal metrics, I keep KPIs on everybody, so I track their training hours, but I don't have to necessarily report those out. And the business unit, the Canadian president is great. All the leadership team I deal with are great, and I don't think they'd ever put pressure and say, okay, you're using less hours, so we need less people. They would just say, they'd probably just ask me the question, but they would trust that I would have it under control because they know that we take business efficiency to the max with the EHS group. And yeah, it's interesting. When we first started talking about business efficiency, I found out that my entire safety team, even my senior managers, they hadn't really thought about it before. A lot of them have worked for other companies where they just went out and did safety inspections, but they never thought about the value to the business. So I made my first rule of order, or my first order of business was, do you know how much that costs for you to get into that company vehicle, drive an hour, do your inspection, and then drive back? And what are you actually producing? And that hour and that cost is true profit to the business. So depending on your margins, that could be 10 times. If you spent 100, it could be $1,000 of revenue they have to make for your safety inspection. So what is the value? And you need to be able to justify that in everything you do. And if you can't, you're probably doing something wrong. You probably need to look at it. And that really, once that people understood that, and they understood that everything they do has to produce some type of value, the quality of safety inspections went up. The buy-in for even the field managers, the operational managers realized that, hey, I have to go do these safety inspections every day or anyway, every month. So I might as well put some effort into them. And they sure get a lot easier when I don't have to write a thesis on them because everybody's compliant. And wow, I don't have to be involved in incident investigations, which could take hours when all my workers are working safely. So there's a lot in it for me as well. But yeah, there's a huge misconception in safety that we're just here to protect employees, and we do that by just adding more PPE, adding more controls, blocking, just adding, and it gets to be where operations can't even do their job.
Yeah, you have to ask that at what cost question.
Yeah,
right. And as a
and then there's a lot of people say, oh, safety has no cost, and I'm like, well, yeah, actually it does. Yeah. It does. Try to be the business owner and have your safety person tell you that, like, there's no cost for safety, just give me a check.
Well, and I think that that's a huge part of the dialogue that we're trying to create here, is that you can't, I think that that's part of why many people in operations groups and so, let's say the broader business community, sometimes have trouble dealing with safety. And I think that leads to this challenge that a lot of safety professionals deal with. But I think it comes down to are we communicating in the language of business, or are we simply saying, hey, we're safety, so give us what we want, and you can't question it because safety first, and you know.
And that language of business is huge. And one of the first things I implemented was we have multiple joint occupational health and safety committees across Canada for each business unit. So we probably have a dozen in total. We have a lot, and they weren't really producing. We were doing them because we have to, by law, we have to have the committee. So, but they weren't really producing anything that make these recommendations that were all wacky, not well thought of, and nothing ever got accomplished. So we basically created a template, which is a mini business case, but it communicates the problem, the solution, and puts dollars and figures to the issue. So now as a business unit director, they see this one-page summary that took the Josh committee 10 minutes to make, said, okay, this is the problem. Wow, this is a solution, and this is the cost and savings. Of course I would approve this. And next thing you know, everything's getting approved because they can see we're talking the same language. You're not just saying, hey, business, buy me these better safety glasses because they're way cooler. No, because they're more comfortable. We're going to wear them more. And this is the actual cost saving, your return on your investment.
Is that, I actually wanted to dig into this, and you're jumping ahead of me already, was to say, you know, if we're going to talk in the language of business, if we're going to be building these business cases, you know, can you help me understand how are you presenting that externally? Is it, from these safety committee documents? Is that kind of your primary weapon? Are there other sort of ways that you use to communicate this outside of the safety organization so that you can get more buy-in for the things you're trying to do?
Yes. So outside of the safety group, so the Josh committee basically creates just the mini case. It's just a one page. These are for very simplistic type of initiatives, like maybe a taller cone for their vehicles, or any more serious issue we funnel up and we look at it from a national approach. Now, if I need a substantial sum, or outside of the EHS group, I do a full business case. I don't do an 80-page business case, like I don't do all the full market survey, what have you, but it's probably a good 10 to 15 pages, and we really focus on the problem, the solution, and the financial analysis. And once the business leaders see that net present value, because that's your true gain, their eyes just go big and go, wow, you're just giving me $500,000 on the table, or $100,000. Why wouldn't I do this? And it just shows too that we're not just safety guys that are a bunch of dummies. We're well educated, and everything we think of is well thought out. And also, I found with operations is planning. A lot of safety people in many companies I've worked for are people I know. They get these new hot topics and say, okay, we're going to do this. Well, yes, but we don't have the money. What do you mean? We're a multi-billion-dollar company. Yeah, but we didn't budget for it. So I saw that as a challenge right away. And I said, okay, I got to get my crap together and be a year in advance, and not blindside these guys with these charges just because I think it's a good idea. And it probably is a good idea, but I need to be ahead of time and budget for it. And so they can plan.
Sorry, delivery guy right behind me. My dog's excited to see
no worries.
Okay, yeah, no, I think that makes a ton of sense. So kind of pausing on this business case piece. I think, this is something that everybody's doing. Side note, any chance I could get a clean copy of that business case? Do you have a template that you use?
I haven't made a template, but I'll definitely share with you some business cases. I'm big on sharing safety documentation because that's how everybody learns. And when you see the financial aspect, and the net present value, and most people will have to Google what net present value is. So yeah. I'll let you do that. But once you see the financial analysis, it doesn't matter what the initiative is. You'll see that it's presented in such a manner that it's a no-brainer. But I'll definitely, I can send you a couple of examples of business cases.
I as long as you're comfortable, I'd love to add them to the show notes, because I think that's what we're trying to do here, is to say, what are these wins that people can build on, and we can all kind of grow together. And on that note, can you have this effective framework to make the business group's eyes light up? I think that's very appealing. Can you think of any examples of times you've executed on that process that might be transferable to businesses other than AFL, like something where you said every single safety person should be running a business case on X, whether it be more comfortable safety glasses or something like that, where you saw a huge amount of value that people maybe aren't thinking about or aren't talking about more publicly?
Yeah, I would say the biggest opportunity for a lot of companies, especially companies with fleets, is driving behavior. That's huge. And the cost with running a fleet is just astronomical. And there's a lot of costs that nobody even thinks about, like repair costs, fuel costs. So very quickly, when I started at this organization, we were having we had several hundred vehicles in Canada, and we were having a ton of vehicle accidents. And I couldn't drive through a city. If we were operating in Kelowna, I'd drive through Kelowna, and at repair shops, I'd see our vehicles. So figured out quickly, we got to implement a system. So I researched for a couple of nights, what's the best driving system? Because my previous career, I was a firefighter, and I took so many driving courses. So I wanted one size fits all. And at the time, the organization was using this online PowerPoint type of training, which I just thought was hokey. My boss, he implemented, and I just didn't agree with it. So I found that the system used by most Fortune 500 companies is called Smith Driver Training out of the US. It's a very big company, and it's been around since the 50s. And once I researched it, I found out that every driving course I've ever taken, has been pretty much stolen from Smith Driving. And so I presented that, and it was actually our CEO, our global CEO at the time, approved it because he was up in Canada. It was a different leadership team than we have now, but our global CEO was up and approved it. And his words were, "This better work because it's not cheap." Very, very expensive program. I sent all our safety team. I did my training in Oakland, California, and it's a week-long instructor course, and it was probably one of the hardest safety courses I've ever taken. But what it teaches you, you drive like a truck driver. Like, you find yourself naturally timing lights. You're not aggressive, and the result is, not only does it reduce accidents, it cuts fuel costs by like 30%, your maintenance costs by 30%. Like, the cost savings is just phenomenal. Insurance costs start coming down because you have all this less vehicle incidents and less vehicle issues. So I would say that's a huge opportunity for companies to invest in with their fleets.
And you saw those results right away once you started to roll that out?
No, it actually, it wasn't. We did see some progress right away, like with statistics, with our vehicle incidents, but really it took, overall, I'd say as a corporation, it took a couple of years before everybody started really applying it. And what we were finding is we'd have incidents, but people, they weren't applying this, what they were taught, the driving techniques. So we said very quickly, well, you have this big expensive program where we're training everybody in Smith driver training, but we're still having vehicle incidents. And I could have responded with, well, they're not following the training. So I met with operations and said, we got to hold people accountable. And that comes to my whole leadership style, is transformational leadership. We need to hold them accountable, but in a positive way. So we started having discussions with employees saying, you were taught these principles and you weren't applying principle X, and that's why you had this vehicle incident. So what do you need from us? Like, what more of, as an employer, can we do? Do you need to be retrained, or did you simply just choose not to follow it? And 90% of times it was, oh, I chose not to follow it. Okay, well, we do need to hold you accountable the same way my boss holds me accountable if I miss a deadline. So you are going to suffer some type of consequence, but we need to move on. And if you feel like you need the training again, we'll give it to you again, because it's very important and you need to follow these principles. So yeah, it took a couple of years for it to really take the full effect. And then I would say about year 3, we just saw our vehicle incident stat plummet. It just plummet. And then operations was on it as well, saying, great, we have all this, we have GPS data. We don't need people idling. And me, from an environmental standpoint, that's been one of my initiatives, is cut down the greenhouse gases. So they see the benefit, one, the environmental aspect, and 2, the cost savings. They don't need vehicles to run for 8 hours while a technician's inside somebody's house. So they're on it as well, because it benefits everybody.
Super cool. And how big of a company do you think you'd need to have to roll that out? Do you think?
If I had a company with a couple of drivers, I would probably be utilizing that training. I probably wouldn't go be instructor trained. I would send the guys for the 1-day course, which is, I don't know, $150. But my whole safety team is Smith certified instructors, just because of the volume we have, and we need flexibility. But if you had a couple of employees, you could jump on a Canadian course rather easily. They have courses several times a year in all the major cities in Canada. And then in the US, they have courses all the time in every city.
Well, I just want to make it clear. This is not an advertisement for Smith's Driving, but glad to hear you got some great results. So with that, I think you've talked about these wins you've had. But earlier you alluded to the KPIs that you hold within your organization. And I just wanted to circle back to that a little bit, because I think that's really interesting. So, you mentioned that you have these advisors reporting to managers with clarified responsibilities in your business units, and then they're reporting to you. Can you help me understand what are the metrics that you're using to measure the success of those people reporting to you, and how often are you checking in? Or is there different stats that you're checking in on a different cadence? Can you just help me understand, like, how are you keeping a pulse of what's going on in your business, especially if you kind of view your role as strategic and one step disconnected from that day to day?
Yeah, so monthly, we definitely, all the injury stats and vehicle stats, like the those like the recordable rate, the vehicle incident rate, those are on a monthly basis. I definitely keep a close eye on those because that's what gets recorded up to the business. But I have several KPIs that the managers and the inspector or the advisors fill out. And because I was finding that they were getting really bogged down with busy work, I call it, stuff that had no value that probably didn't need to be done as a priority. So the KPIs are how many days they're spent training, but how many days they're spent as a student. And let me expand on that in a second. But so how many days they're actually training. So I know that, okay, they've been out of commission 18 of the 20 days they're working, so I can't expect too much. How many hazard assessments have they reviewed? And how many incidents they've investigated? And how many safety meetings they've attended? And those are pretty much the big statistics. And I put it, and getting back to the training days as a student, I really focus a lot of emphasis on what you're doing as a professional to get better. So a lot of my meetings with my safety team, the first 50% of it is them. What are you doing to get better? How's that degree going? How's that certificate? How was that seminar? And I care more about that because what I find is if you treat people properly and put that focus on their own educational growth, whatever that looks like for them, the rest takes care of itself. They're a true professional and they drive themselves harder than I could ever drive them. I do look at their KPIs once a month, but I really focus on, in some month I say, hey, why is X person in this province, they don't look like they're doing much. So I don't want to walk and jump in over and jump in my EHS manager's business, but I will call that safety advisor and just say, how's it going? How's that certificate going? Oh, really? Really? It's kind of frozen right now. Well, why are you not progressing with it? Oh, okay. Well, maybe, so you're going to, and then just push them to get that going and get them back on track. So I don't just call them and say, hey, you only did 2 hazard assessments reviews this month or attended 1 safety meeting out of 8. Like, what's wrong with you? Why are you being so lazy, or why are you not meeting your goals? I really focus on them, and a lot of times I'll find out that they had a personal situation they had to deal with, or they had other things with the business which they were helping. So I try not to make conclusions too quickly when I read the KPIs. Yeah.
One of the KPIs you mentioned. Oh, 1 second. Okay, we're all right. I think we're all right. We're okay. My cat sometimes sits on the recording thing and starts it, so it fills up the thing with silent air. Anyway, going back to the KPIs you're talking about, you mentioned hazard assessment reviews. Can you just help me understand specifically what that means and what it tells you?
Yeah, so I see hazard assessments in the field as the foundation of our whole safety program. So that's a real good indication if you're dealing with 2 true professionals or just somebody that's there for a job. So by reviewing their hazard assessment, we basically can quickly identify who really cares about it and who we should be treating as a professional.
And the hazard assessment is kind of like a risk assessment document. Is it toolbox talk?
So every morning our employees show up the job because most of them are working remotely by themselves. They have their van and they go to a customer's home, and they could be at 10 customer homes that day. So we don't have the opportunity to bring them all together for a toolbox talk in the morning and have that oversight. So they need to do a hazard assessment. So before they leave in their house in the morning, they say, okay, what's the traffic like? I need to look on the news, look on my journey, start it with driving. What's the hazards? I got to apply Smith driving as a control. So if I go to a job site and you've been working for 10 years for us, right away I ask for your hazard assessment, and if it's blank, we have some serious problems because it shows that you think you know everything and probably don't really care too much. So that's a big problem. And by reviewing that hazard assessment, we can even find not so much even the employees that don't care, but we can find pockets of employees that don't care. And it usually transitions into, well, they're all working for the same manager. So we have a bigger problem here that we need to address. Why is this one specific manager why is it his employees or her employees that are all having this issue? So we really try to figure out the root cause of it and focus on the manager and say, you need to spend more time driving this message home because it's your team that's not doing this. Every other team is.
So that's kind of your primary proactive kind of cultural pulse is through those hazard assessment reviews.
Correct. And we can't manage the teams because we're just too, like, my person in BC could have 400 people sometimes. So we manage the managers because they manage their teams, and we call out the managers, and it's nothing personal, but we'll call them out to their bosses and the directors and say, like, this is a failure. You need to address it and sort it out. It's nothing personal. It's just, it needs to be identified, and they need to do their job and get their teams engaged.
Okay, and so those I just want to double tap on this a little bit because I think it's a good transition to the next thing I want to talk about. So those hazard assessments, is that an analog process? That is it a piece of paper they're filling out? Are you guys using technology for this? What is that?
Yes. So some of our business is still using paper, and then the biggest part of our business is the installation and repair business. We actually created an app with our engineers in South Carolina through Power Apps, and we just try to look at efficiency, because technically we should be reading these hazard assessments each day as an employer and making sure that employees are addressing hazards appropriately. And this is rather overwhelming. If you have 400 employees in a province each day, each producing a hazard assessment, well, by the end of the week, you have a lot of hazard assessments to review. So we tried to create an app where we can have the back end data, and it gets flagged. So if an employee has does a hazard assessment and the risk is high, and then with mitigations it's still high or medium, well, then we'll be notified and we can jump in there and say, whoa, either you're not doing this correctly or you haven't mitigated this appropriately. And it just drives efficiency to review them. So instead of sitting down and reviewing 200 at a time, we can go digitally. Operations can even log in digitally and look at them. We can look at them post incidents as well and use them. And also EHS can log in and look at them, and we can create automatic reporting functions off it.
Very cool. Very cool. And so is that one of the questions I wanted to dig into is what does your kind of tooling look like? So, we're trying to talk about safety tech more than EHS software. I just think that's a very old fashioned way to talk about things. So, is that your kind of primary technology outplay? Are you guys using anything else to understand what's going on? What does that kind of ecosystem look like for you?
Yeah, so I'm definitely not a techie guy, and I'm very thrifty, and I don't like buying the new latest and greatest gadgets because they're expensive, and yeah, I'm just not that type of guy. So we looked at developing something for free. What do we have at our current offering? And that was the Power Apps through Microsoft. We did have some licensing challenges, which our IT engineers were able to overcome, but that's my whole thought process on cost is if we can do it internally for cheaper, why wouldn't we? Yeah. We do have an incident management system globally that we were using for our quality teams for manufacturing. And last 2 years, we've been modifying it. And we actually did a business case and said, we need a new incident management system across the globe. What's the best? So we evaluated a few different top systems, and the system we chose is the one we're using with quality, our quality team, because we already have engineer on staff that can modify it for us. So some companies I talked to, they said, okay, we bought such and such management system and it's phenomenal, but it costs us $250,000 a year to make changes to it.
Yeah.
And I'm not paying $250,000 a year to change an incident management system when we can do it for free. So we already
not for free. We talked about business case. You got to pay that engineer.
Well, yeah, we pay him, but he's already on salary, and we just use some of his time to make those changes. So it was the most cost-effective model. We just bought the module out of ETQ, it's called, and made it meet our needs. And we launched it globally. And then any challenges that come up, we have an engineer on staff that can help make those changes.
Okay, gotcha. That makes sense to me. Okay, so that's that. I guess one of the things we talked a little bit about finance. I won't get into your budget specifically. We don't need to talk about that. But So you've got all these pieces. It sounds like you have a pretty buttoned up program. So I guess looking forward into the next year, can you just help me articulate, and maybe if you phrased it as if you were talking to someone on your team, what what are the what are how would you articulate the goals for AFL Canada or even globally from a safety perspective? Do you think are you okay with safety goals? I know some people that's a loaded topic. So yeah, what are your thoughts there?
Yeah, so our safety goals. So safety is definitely a core value at AFL. It's probably their top safety, like their top core value. It's the first thing we talk about with a lot of meetings. So we do have statistical goals because our CEO, our Canadian president, they want to see continual improvement. They're of the same mindset that we always need to be getting better. My biggest goal for 2022, COVID really opened my eyes a bit. I've been so busy the last several years, just drive, constant improvement. But I think as labor market becomes more challenging, I think succession planning is hasn't had the same attention that it should be. So um, when I look back at COVID, I said, okay, a lot of people are resigning, and I'm not doing my job because I don't have a next in line for even myself. I have somebody that could probably do the job, but have I spent the right amount of time getting them ready for my job? And a lot of safety people don't think that way. A lot of people in general, because they don't want somebody ready to replace them. And I think that's the wrong attitude. I want my next in line to outshine me. And if it's her time to take over, well, then it's her time to take over. And I guess I need to find a new job. But so COVID really showed me that. And I've never had anybody leave my group up until this last 2 weeks. I had two members on my team. One member started out from scratch. He came to he was an internal hire, and I put him in a WCB coordinator role. And his first job, he oversaw like 9 WCB accounts in 2 different languages. And I worked with education with him from the ground up for the last few years. And he was at a point in his career where he really needed to spread his wings into another organization, and I did not want to lose him. It's hard to lose people, and he didn't want to go, but professionally he was kind of stagnant. He needed to go. So we had that conversation that, hey, you're not doing yourself any favors. I want you to go on to the next chapter of your career, and you need to try other organizations and other industries to get that full gamut of experience. So he actually took that advice. He was hired rather quickly, and it was tough to see him go. So now I'm on the hunt for a new WCB coordinator. And then one of my managers was in this point of his last few working years of life, and he was kind of needed a fresh start and just to do that final 5-year push. And we talked about his career and what's best for him. But what's best for me is keeping these people, because less work for me to train people, bring new people on board, but it wasn't the right thing. And what was best for him is moving on to more a role he was comfortable with spending the next 5 years in. So he moved on. So I think succession planning is very important, because if I win the lottery tomorrow, I need somebody to step in my shoes and take over, because it's not fair to the business that I make every system around myself, or the entire EHS group all about myself. And that's for every role. We need to be able to have people in place to step in and take over.
What do you think is the biggest thing that would get in the way of you doing that succession planning? Is it just the day-to-day, the hit?
Yeah, time, but it's really and I'll go to a quote by Rick Fulweiler, who I had the honor of being one of his students for a week program. And he has a quote saying, if you don't make 5 minutes today, then you'll spend an hour tomorrow. And he was talking about safety, something like that for the quote. But you just have to prioritize it. We all get so busy with our day-to-day job that it always gets pushed aside, and we just need to focus on that and make it top of mind. Okay, what am I doing today that this person could be involved in? And what don't I want them to be involved in just yet? And so I'd say time and our own prioritization is a problem. But for some, now I'm lucky in my group, everybody's super keen on improving. And I'm quite blunt sometimes. I'll tell people you have a deficiency and this is how we're going to fix it. But some people can't handle that, to hear that others think they're not perfect. But you need that willingness to realize that you're not perfect, and here's an area you can improve on, and here's some courses you can take, and we're gonna fund it. We're gonna help you fix these deficiencies so you can be a better person, better safety professional, and move on up the world. But some people just don't want to move up. Some people are happy with staying in their position, and that's fine too. You got to respect that. They know what they want. Maybe their personal life is more important, or they have other things on the go, which is fine, but you can still get better at what you're doing. You may not be taking a MBA or your master's degree, but there's books you can read, there's courses you can take. You can always be getting better at what you're doing.
And so to flip things a little bit, if people need more time, in order for us to, whether it be succession planning or professional development or whatever that is there anything, and this is maybe the more of the hot takes section of the conversation, but what are the things that people are doing, say, peers of yours, safety leaders at other organizations? What do you think people are wasting time on? What's the thing that maybe safety professionals are focusing a lot of energy on right now that you think doesn't make a lot of sense, or you think might be worth reevaluating? Anything fall in that category for you?
I don't know. I meet regularly with a lot of like senior safety people. I don't know so much about their professional life, but I think we waste a lot of time in our personal lives. We spend a lot of time watching TV, surfing the net, what have you. And I think there's a lot more you can do with your days. Like, for instance, because I sit on a computer all day and then I'm going to school at night and I have a lot of stuff on the go. I put on like 20, 30 pounds that I don't need to put on. So my wife has me hiking every morning, and the only time I can do that is at 5 a.m. So we hike at 5 a.m. and it definitely sucks getting up at 5 a.m. to hike for an hour. But you know what? I feel great. I'm losing weight and I feel better. And I don't technically need so much sleep as you get older. I go to bed at a decent time. I make sure I get my proper sleep, but I'm just working on my own efficiency and being better at what I do. Now, I don't have time to watch a lot of TV because I don't need that time. I need time to go to school. I need time. It's amazing what you can actually get done in a day when you just focus and make yourself a list and say, at the end of the day, I'm getting this, and this done. And I try not to do it now because it pushes me too much, but I used to put times by it. I said, for the next 15 minutes, I'm working on my 2022 goals. For the next 30 minutes, I'm doing my EHS plan. For next 40 minutes, I'm reviewing incidents. But yeah, there's a lot of time we waste in our personal lives that we don't need to waste.
For sure. Okay. I can feel, I can relate to that. Yeah, a lot of anecdotes I could share there, but I'll resist. Maybe a little bit of a circle back. One thing that I think is always interesting to ask safety people, because there's always like a philosophical element to this role. So I'd be curious, how do you explain to your family what you do?
It's tough. It's tough. A lot of people don't know what safety does, and they overhear my meetings, and I've got asked by my one kid at UVic, what actually do you do? And I said, a little bit of everything, actually. I said, I try to keep my workers safe in a cost-effective manner. And she says, okay, I still don't know what you do. So I try to break it down, and I had to do a presentation for my youngest. This was years ago. It was a grade 2 class. And it just so happened my one safety person from Saskatchewan was out visiting the island at the time. So I asked him, I said, I'm going to build a slide deck, and would you mind coming with me? Because he's an older guy, he has grandkids. And I said, would you mind coming with me while I do this presentation? And then we'll carry on with work. He said, okay. So we went there, and I said, how am I going to tell a group of grade 2 class what I do for safety? So I talked about toys, and I talked about how a safety professional, these are toys from the 50s. And these are toys now. And then we looked at some of the hazards with toys. So I didn't even have to go back to the 50s. Like, even when I was a kid with lawn darts, I don't know if you remember those. So I tell my kids about lawn darts, and they say, you what? you take a big dart, you throw it up in the air, and there's people over there, and it's going to land on the ground by them. That's nuts. So I just related it to toys. I built this quick slide deck showing toys from the early days and how toys have progressed now to being a lot safer. Toys that you put in your mouth, they make sure they don't have paint. And I said, that's all safety, people. And then I had my kid, and she didn't even want to do this at the time. It was like I was asking her to commit a crime. I wanted her to grab like some power tools. And she's like, I'm not touching those. I'm not allowed. Those will hurt me. And I said, no, just hold it. It's not even plugged in. And she did not want to do it. But I got some pictures taken. And once the kids saw Colby holding the saw, I'm like, now what is she doing wrong? And I said, she could cut her hand off because she's never used a saw. She's not wearing eye protection, so she could get wood in her eyes. They were all horrified that she was even holding the saw. But it just shows that progress over generations regarding safety. But that's how I try to relate it to them through toys.
Oh, that's an awesome example. I'm glad I asked you that, because I was not expecting such a detailed response. Okay, so we're just wrapping things up here, I guess. With that, is there anything else you'd like to say? Whether it be broadly to the safety community, anything you want. I think this creates an interesting opportunity to say something to your team in a different context that you might want them to know or communicate. I don't know. Anything you want to add?
I would say to all safety professionals is, and I didn't even realize this was my style until I took a program, and I highly recommend everybody, senior safety people, take it. It changed my life. It's a 1-week safety program at Harvard. Rick Fulweiler runs it, and I consider him one of the smartest safety people I've ever met. And the professors and the outside professors that come in are just top notch in the world. But it really changed my life to show you what, as a safety professional, what level you can get to. But it really talks about transformational leadership, and like safety, we don't have all the answers, but we need to treat people. We're in the people business. We need to treat people with respect, treat them as professionals, whether it's an employee coming to get a new cell phone or has a pay issue. We want that to be a good experience. We want the whole experience of the business to be positive, and safety just falls into that. So I highly recommend people look into that program. It's a 1-week program that will literally change your professional path.
Okay, awesome. And one of the things I like to do here is use my featured guests as a way to generate a little bit more, or figure out who else we're going to have on the show. So who else should we have on here? Who else should we talk to?
I highly recommend you start talking to some operations and say, what's the problem with safety? What could we be doing better? Because we all get so wrapped up in our own bubbles, and sometimes they're maybe too polite to tell us, but I love it when operations says, oh, you bloody safety guys do this. Okay, thanks. I will fix that. I didn't even know that was a problem. I love that feedback, because we all think we're perfect and we're so great at what we do. And how could operations not love everything? So I love getting feedback from operations on ways we could get better.
And any specific operations people that I should reach out to? Names?
Oh, I'd say the more senior, the better. I don't have any names, but I would say the more senior, the better, because they've been around for a long time with lots of experience. And hopefully I'm sure they'll give you the truthful manner of what they don't like in safety and what they do like. That insight is valuable. Like when I have discussions with our president, who is extremely brilliant and extremely experienced, he looks at things in a totally different manner than I look at them. And I always sit back and go, wow, it's like hearing the judgment from a Supreme Court judge. Like the wisdom that comes out from a person at that level is just phenomenal. So it's a huge opportunity for everybody to learn from it.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I think we can probably do something with that. I have a few people in mind, so we'll see what we can do. With that, Steve, thank you so much. I think we've covered everything. Thanks for joining us. I think people are going to get a lot of great stuff out of this. And thanks for coming on.
All right. Thank you very much.
Thanks for listening to Safety Leaders Now with Joe Meadows. This show is presented to you by OpsLog and produced by me, Valeria Carnau. Big thanks to Diala for the theme music and Hatch for editing the podcast. Our next episode comes out in a week. If you haven't already, Please rate, review, and subscribe to Safety Leaders Now on any platform that you stream podcasts. If you want to connect with Joe, don't hesitate to reach out to him on LinkedIn at Joe Meadows. Thanks for listening. Catch you on the next episode.